accents play a big part in that. So I guess, what was your approach to the design of them, the look, the feel, the sound, the whole Sean Chan vibe?
Yeah, our team in Prague is incredible at sort of how they create characters, how they create worlds, and every season we'll sit down and talk about the new worlds that we get to go to that year. So for this season, the Sean Chan was obviously a huge piece of that, and my first sit-downs with the teams were difficult because I was basically like, okay, so what we need is a group of people who feel entirely alien to our world, but also within the world of the Wheel of Time. And they were like, ah. And so, we tried to, all of us together, mine through the books and find different things that we could bring out and sort of bring to the surface that can be interesting and give that feeling. And I think the hair and makeup team, Davina, who does our hair and makeup's incredible, Sharon Gillum, who does the costumes, they worked really closely together, worked with Andre Nekvasil, who does the production design. All of these teams work together to give this aesthetic and bouncing the colors off each other. What's their color scheme? What feels different in the world? What'll look good in our sets in Morocco? What will... And from the accent point of view, that was something that was in the books, actually, or in Robert Jordan's mind at least, was the idea that the Sean Chan had American drawls, like a Southern drawl. And so for us, we thought about, okay, what if we could put that accent on the Sean Chan? That is an accent we've avoided in the show because it feels very modern. But if we do our version of it that has sort of this like Civil War era lilt to it, then it can sit in the show and still make them feel kind of alien.
I guess this is also kind of a first principles type question, but just with the Sean Chan alone, it's a perfect example. You're dealing with costumes, you're dealing with set design, you're dealing with makeup design, hair, the actual performances, the accents, the special effects involved with the Damani and the Suldam, all that kind of stuff. And that's just like one part of one storyline of this whole world that you have to supervise. So when you, in your mind, have to tackle like a situation that huge, how do you start thinking, all right, I'm going to liaise with this department and this department and this department? Is there a process that you go through, or do you kind of...
We have a lot of meetings.
Okay.
We do. No, it really, Marigo can speak to it. We probably had truly hundreds of meetings about the Sean Chan, starting as soon as we were in the writer's room, because you do need all those departments working together. And when television is at its very best, every single department is additive and is lifting the product overall. And so I think we were really able to achieve that with the Sean Chan. And we have, some new places we're going in season 3 that the team has been working very hard on this year. And so it's exciting to see those worlds getting built.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I really liked about this season, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit with Egwene and Nynaeve, is that there are these almost self-contained stories that feel almost like a short story within the larger narrative. I remember watching with my family the episode where Nynaeve goes through the arches, and when she finally gets out, my kid turned to me and was like, that was a good episode. And then the opening title pops up because it felt so satisfying and fulfilling in and of itself. Was that something that you did on purpose? With that, and I'm thinking specifically of that in the Egwene episode where she is trained and broken.
Yeah, every season we sort of sit down in the writer's room, and one of the things that we do at the very beginning is pick out a couple of the stories that we have to carve out the space to make a whole episode for. It's 8 episodes to tell the amount of story we have to tell is an almost impossible and daunting challenge every season. And so to further make it really almost 6 episodes you have to tell that story is huge, but we think it's worth it because those stories will really stand out to an audience, especially that doesn't know the books, when they're given that time and it's carved out so they can really follow that character on that journey. And so every season, the first season was more of a group journey that had the one big Moraine episode, but for seasons 2 and 3, we've really carved out, 2 episodes a season that can really be devoted to one of the characters.
I guess that kind of speaks to a larger issue of balance. I was thinking specifically in this finale, just watching it now, I was like, well, you've got Rand, you have, I mean, I could list all the characters, you all know who the characters' names are, but you have all of these people, and plus like other separate things, like, you know, there's stuff with the White Cloaks, there's stuff with the Forsaken. It's not just our heroes, in other words. Like, how do you, like, when you sit and you watch, you know, your whatever, rough cut of it, like, and I'm like, that's kind of off balance, this needs a little more weight, this needs a little, like, is that like kind of how it works? Like you kind of snip and add and tweak, or?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it that way because it is so big and so complicated, and you never want the audience to lose emotional track of the characters. Or at least that's, for me, that's the main thing I'm looking for, is I feel like audiences in television are connected when they're connected emotionally. So there are things that sometimes you have to put, like in this finale, there's a really important sequence from the books where Ingtar, who is the guy that was captured with Perrin and Loyal, is revealed to be a dark friend, and it's a big story in the books. It's something I love in the books, and we shot it, and it just, you couldn't emotionally connect to it with the number of other things that were going on in the finale. So we ultimately had to pull it in the cut process because it disrupted your ability to follow our lead characters through it. Although I think, oh, Holly might kill me, but that will be a deleted scene that we release eventually, so you can see it. Because Greg, who plays Ingtar, is fantastic, and it's a great scene, and it's wonderful from the books. And I think it should be in the canon of the world, but it just didn't make sense in the finale.
Mm-hmm. You talked about how you need to keep the audience emotionally invested, and that's kind of like the key to making those kinds of decisions. Like, is it ever a challenge, and I don't mean this as an insult to anybody really, but is it ever a challenge to keep the actors rooted in the emotions of it, given the scale of everything going on? Like, do they ever come to you like, I feel a little lost, like with all this stuff going on, or like, how do you find it?
Yeah, I mean, our actors are incredible because they also, and I think a lot of the reason that we gravitated towards the actors that are in the show is because they are drawn in by the emotion too, and they really want to follow their character through. And so, you know, we'll have sit downs with all of them and sort of say, you know, do you understand what's going on this scene with a magic dagger and a guy that was in a season with a different actor that isn't you, and that it cuts through this, and like, there's so many layers of complexity, and so I think my time is well spent talking to the actors and the directors about what those layers of complexity are, so that when they step onto set, they can just feel it, and all of that is there. Natasha, who plays Lanfear, is a great example of that. She's always playing 50 levels in every scene, and we just talk through what they are beforehand, of like, oh, actually you knew him in a past life and you tried to kill him, and like, you know, you were in love with him, but also you don't want him to know that you were, but you kind of do want him to know that you were. And so, and she's able to take, we have incredible actors on the show, some actors that would cripple, actually, like they could not function with that level of knowledge about what's going on. They just kind of need like one through line to track, but our actors are so invested in it and so good that, you know, Tash can take all of that in, nod, and then just go do it, and it's perfect. And that's, you know, that's a big blessing we have on the show with the quality of our actors. And
it seems like with Lanfear, I'm glad you brought her up, because one thing that seems so crucial to this season and to the story in general is like, you do kind of have to believe that it's possible for Rand to choose these people, who after all used to be his friends, and have their own, we may not agree with what they're trying to do, but like, she loves him, you know. Ishamel, like, is just kind of tired of all the suffering and wants to end it permanently. Like, of course, that causes a lot of problems, but for everybody, but, you know, understandable. Like, so it seems to me like that's a big part of it. Like, you know, she kind of has to nail Lanfear to make Rand make sense, almost in a way.
Yeah, we feel like that's such an important part of watching the show and feeling the show. When you read the books, especially in these early ones, actually, the Forsaken are much more kind of like big bad guy, you know, like Ishamael presents as a flaming head that just screams nightmare things at Rand, which is very cool when you're in the books, but it isn't until the later books that you start to realize who Ishamael really is and why he wants to do the things he does. And so we thought it was important to put that up front for exactly the reason that you're talking about, of if the Shadow is going to be a a hypothetical choice for our characters, then you want to see people who made that choice for reasons that you really understand. And so we've gone out of our way to every person who's chosen the shadow in the show, you hopefully have some kind of emotional understanding of why they did it.
There's a character I want to talk about who is not human, who is called Hopper. And it was, I have to say, a tough scene to watch in a big crowd of people on a huge screen, watching that poor wolf get it. Obviously people who read the books knew this was coming, but it's still tough to watch. And I was just wondering what went into the creation of that scene.
No, I mean, one of the basic rules of television they tell you when you start working is that if you kill a dog on screen, no one will ever watch the show again. And we broke that rule. But I think that what was important to us is really making you, in the books, you love Hopper because Hopper is a character. Hopper is a character that you pay attention to. And so and Hopper does die at the hands of White Cloak. So we had the task of sort of getting you to really feel for Hopper also in the show, so that when that moment hits, that you feel like you're losing a character, not a dog. And I think that they achieved that, and I think a big piece of what we chose to do with it is a lot of shows take the route of going CGI with wolves. Wolves are very hard to work with. And so you really don't want to put them with your actors. So we used Czechoslovakian wolf dogs instead. And Marcus, who plays Perrin, spent, hours and hours and hours with Kalupinka, who plays Hopper, because we wanted that relationship to be real. So he would walk her around the lot all the time, and they'd spend time together on the weekends. And Marcus's relationship with Kalupinka is one of the sweetest things. She just, when she saw him again this year, she just leapt at him. She remembered him, and and you feel that on the screen. When she's looking at him, you actually feel that there is a connection between him and her. So that was the choice we made, to use real animals and to make sure that Marcus, the actor, had a relationship with our dog actor, Kalupinka.
It came through. When he gets mad, I felt that. I don't blame you, buddy. I don't blame you. So the reaction to that scene kind of leads to a larger question, which is that this season was extremely well received. Not just by people like me, but people, just fans. And I wanted to ask you, were you taking this in as the season played out, or were you just kind of sitting back and not looking at it? And now that you know how people felt about it, how do you feel?
I mean, it's wonderful to see people love the show and to see them come to the books from the show and, create this world that I grew up loving with my mom and with my family, and more people are now a part of it, is really an amazing thing to feel. But I usually, I don't know, I was on Survivor years and years ago, so you immediately get very used to the idea of you just have to take everything on the internet with a grain of salt. So positive, negative, whatever it is, you just sort of appreciate that we're working on one of the few things that millions and millions of people around the world are watching. There are so many shows that go out right now and no one sees them, and this is one that everybody's watching, and that's really exciting because then you're a part of something and doing something that can be relevant, and that's an amazing thing.
Yeah. Did you have favorite storylines in this season beyond the one, or were they the ones that we just talked about? But I'm really curious about that too, because you're a fan in addition to being the person who runs the show. Was there stuff as a Wheel of Time fan that you're yes, we're doing it, yeah?
There is always where you just get excited that you get to do those stories. I really responded to the Egwene story when I read the books. In this season, her storyline of being a Damane, it felt so different than anything I'd read before. So to be able to bring that to life was really, really special. And then I think the harder ones are the ones that I personally love from the books, but know that we're not going to get to do, and that actually causes me more emotional pain than the joy I get from the ones we do.
Yeah, that's got to be difficult, like to try and separate your feelings as a fan from your feelings as like the person who is like, I make a television show here, and like that's got to be my responsibility first and foremost.
Yeah, well, I think Wheel of Time is very unique in terms of book series, in that like people who read it all have their favorite storylines, and all of those people have different favorite storylines. Like, I guarantee you there are people sitting here who skipped random Perrin chapters to get to Egwene and Nynaeve chapters, and there's people who skipped Egwene and Nynaeve chapters to get to Perrin and Rand chapters, and that's just the truth of this. And there are also books where you like suddenly are falling back in love with that character that you didn't think you liked for a while. And so our duty as the show is to not skip those chapters. Like, you really have to pay attention to those characters and give them the highlight in the seasons that make the most sense for them to get the highlight. This season was a really big Egwene Nynaeve season for us. Next season is a really big Rand Perrin season for us. So there are always different characters who are sort of like rising in importance, but all of those people, you know, are the core of the show.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to get back to the Forsaken for a second because, you know,
because we always have to talk about
yes, of course, yes. Ishamil returned for this season and, you know, became this really magnetic, compelling, complex character. Lanfear was introduced and I think was like a huge hit for everybody. But right there at the end, we met another Forsaken. And I was wondering if you could talk about that person a little bit, if you can.
Yeah, I think I can say some things about Moghedien, who, you know, Laia Costa, who plays Moghedien, had a really big challenge to do, which is that we've just had an episode that is, you know, a feature film in terms of VFX and armies and fire dragons and Rosamund Pike on a beach shredding, you know, like, and then, but the final scene is just a new character talking, and, you know, that is a big challenge as an actor to come in, and that scene for us was to give the promise of season 3 and what the Forsaken will eventually mean in the show, because I think that you might, through this season, start to think like, I love Ishamil and Lanfear so much, there's no way I could love another Forsaken more, and Laia set out to prove that you actually can.
I mean, it's super cool as a moment too, because at the end of the first season, you had this, you know, this sort of kicker with the Sean Chan showing up, and you're just like, what is going on? And it panned out great. So, like, I don't know, personally, I feel a little bit of confidence there for it. It's like, well, they tried this once and it worked. So
I've seen some of the Moghedien scenes from season 3, and this is just the beginning.
Nice. So let's see here. So you did a presentation, a panel for Comic-Con. And my understanding is that you announced some stuff, and I was wondering if you could, you know, for people who might have missed it, what happened, what went down?
Yeah, I think we announced that Aiel Waste and the city of Rhuidean will be in season 3. We can officially say it. I think today I'm allowed to say that there is another world that we have been working very hard to build, and that is the world of Tanchico. And it's tropical, it's so different than anything else you've ever seen on the show before. And genuinely, I don't know if I can say this, but we built, I will do it. We built this area where there's a bar, and there's some of our characters like Nynaeve and Elaine that you love that are in there, and literally this place was just so wild, and the costumes are so different. There's tropical plants hanging from the ceiling, and everyone looks like they could kill anyone at any moment. And we all just hung out after set one day in that bar because we were having such a good time there shooting. So I think Tanchico's gonna bring a real fresh energy to the show in season 3.
Yeah.
Ooh, there's one more place I'm allowed to talk about too. We shot it just a couple weeks ago, which is we have built a sea folk ship and cast some sea folk. So we'll get to see the world of that, which you don't know anything about yet, but you will soon, Sean.
Okay. I appreciate that. One thing that I think, you know, kind of a fundamental thing about this season is that the first season was very much like, here's your band of companions, they're on a quest. This season, they're scattered to the 4 winds. does that present its own, I mean, I think it does, but like its own unique challenges? Like, do you have a preference even? Like, would you rather have the gang back together, or do you prefer when they're out kind of pursuing their own things, or like having their own...
I think what you need is a balance of both of the things, really. One thing that we really wanted to go for this season was seeing each of the characters for at least a couple episodes completely on their own. And all of our 7 leads got that this season, where you really saw them on their own, because that's, in a way, for TV, it's like the audience is getting a POV chapter where you feel like you're in the head of the characters. And Wheel of Time is really like, it's an incredible novel series because you spend so much time in the head of the characters, but it's not like Game of Thrones where it translates perfectly easily to television. I mean, those have like act breaks built into them. And so for us, these sequences where we can be alone with the character and kind of get the audience really in their head are invaluable, because they do the work that gets done in the books by these POV chapters where you get to actually hear what the character is thinking.
I guess we're running towards the end of our time here, but you had mentioned that like one of the things you prioritize is like, okay, this is a fantasy show. There's a lot of fantasy shows. What can our fantasy show do that's different? And I've noticed, and certainly I've responded to it, to me that's like the most exciting thing about the Wheel of Time as a television show, is that like you think this is such well-trod territory, and you wind up going down these directions that like you never would have anticipated. Things work very, very differently than they do in a lot of fantasy series. Like one thing I've talked about at home is that like there've been a lot of fantasy series where like the cast is like very even in terms of who's important, like men or women, but like not one where there's not a patriarchy. That's new. That's exciting. Yeah, clap for that. Yeah. So, you know, I guess like looking forward, do you see this as like a challenge? Like, are you constantly going to have to be like, how are we going to top what we did last season? Like, how are we going to...
That's the great thing about adapting this book series, is I'm just like, oh my God, yeah, this is good, but wait till what happens in season 3. Like, you know, there are actually things that happen in the books all the way through that are so different, and no one's doing them, and we're really leaning into those. And it's very cool because, you know, it was funny, I clicked on my own Amazon Prime to watch Wheel of Time, because everyone should watch it on their Amazon Prime as many times as they want. And
it's bingeable now. Yeah, you can watch the whole thing from start to finish.
Go back to season 1, watch them both, just leave it on.
Take a day.
It said, you know, it has like the 3 keywords that it does for it, all of the shows, and it said for Wheel of Time it had strange, ambitious, and epic. And I was like, you know what, that is great. Those are words I would choose for the show, because I do think it's strange, and that's one of its huge things that it's got going for it, is you don't expect where the story is going. It doesn't fall in these kind of trodden pathways that we're used to and getting used to in fantasy television. And it is ambitious. It does crazy stuff, and we get to do crazy stuff on the show. And it is epic. You get to see new worlds every season, and we have an amazing budget from Amazon that we try to use to the maximum to put a lot on screen. So, you know, that is... I think that's part of the fun of this series, is that, like, I know that there are all these stories that are strange and ambitious and epic that we still have to do, and that's the excitement of it.
Well, I feel like you gave everybody a lot of stuff to look forward to in the strange, ambitious, and epic categories, so thanks so much for coming out to talk.